Hey guys, welcome back. My name is Grace. I'm going to be wrapping up all the books that I read in January. January was a very stressful, terrible month for me. It was not a good start to the year. Luckily, almost everything is resolved, so that's all been taken care of. But yeah, it was rough going. So let me start off with the first book that I read. I'm going to go in chronological order. So the first book was The Whispers by Ashley Audrain. I read The Push by her last year or the year before. And she kind of just writes a good story about the dark side of motherhood. It has that theme going along with it. In this book, you kind of have this neighborhood setup, like Block Party, where you have multiple POVs of women on the same street. So you're kind of piecing together the story from what they tell you. So you know a little bit more than each character knows, right? And that's just a setup that I've found that I really, really enjoy. So the main character is Whitney. I forget their last name. And, well, they're all main characters. But she is kind of where the story takes place. So she throws this party one year. It's a neighborhood party. And Whitney is the envy of the neighborhood. She's beautiful. She works. Her husband works. They make good money. So they have the nicest house. They have the nicest cars. Their kids are well dressed. And everybody kind of envies her a little bit because she is the hot mom, right? Well, at this party, everything is beautiful, everything is going well, and she's the belle of the party, as she always is. And then she goes inside for some reason, and she sees that her 10-year-old boy, Xavier, has ravaged all the treat bags that she had set out for guests. And he is just covered in chocolate, and he's 10 or 11, so he knows better. It's implied that he may have autism, and she starts screaming at him what the F are you doing? What is wrong with you? Why would you do that? And she goes off on a tirade, right? And then she realizes it's very quiet. And then she looks and sees the window is open. Everybody at the party has heard me screaming and cussing out my kid. And eventually she has to go down, but the tone definitely changes and everybody sees her differently from that point on. They always remember how she yelled at her kid. Flash forward to a year later, and Xavier has fallen from his bedroom window and is in a coma. And everybody is thinking would she have done this? Do you remember how she yelled at him? Is she capable? Yes, no. And all these little things are pulling people in one direction or the other. Like I said, you have multiple POVs. You have all the neighbors, this woman that's trying to have a baby, but she can't. You have her best friend who's kind of she sees herself as a frumpy housewife. And one of my favorite POVs was her neighbor. I think her name was Marta. And basically this neighborhood was a Portuguese neighborhood before it became gentrified. And once it was she was the last of the old crowd that stayed behind. And her POV, she's older, but she did have a kid. And it's implied that he was autistic, but that he didn't have the vocabulary for it and she didn't know how to help him. And she did love him. She did struggle with him. She has this moment where she did tough love trying to get him to snap out of it. And she just has her regrets basically. But yeah, that book was really, really good. Everything about it it's a wine mom book. I don't drink wine, but that's how I classified it in my head. And then I read 3 Lucinda Berry books. I feel I can say the same thing about all these books. The thing about Lucinda Berry books is it's not the best book you're ever going to read, but it does keep you engaged the entire time you're reading it. And the reason why I say that is because the plot is never too convoluted where you can't see what's coming. It's kind of okay, it's either going to be A or B, and it's going to be one of those two. And the characters are not great. They're not well developed. It's they're either the mom, the father, or the kid, and they're either the good or bad version of that, and they're very flat. But I also feel that helps the story move along because you can jump in and out of these books so easily. I'm reading this book right now and I am enjoying the writing and the story, but it's hard for me to get into it right now if I were to pick it up. It takes me a minute. These books, you can pick up pages here and there while you're waiting in line, while you're at the school drop off or pick up, they're just they are good books, but they're just not the best books, right? So the first book was When She Returned. This is a cult book. So you have your main character, Kate, who was married with a daughter, and she's a news journalist or something, and she starts writing about this cult that moved into the area. But the more she writes about it, the more she falls in love with the idea of the cult. Eventually, she goes missing, and her family has no idea. The cult does try to help find her, but she's just gone. Nobody has answers. And finally, one day she returns, and the book is just trying to figure out what happened, and you have the POV of Kate who disappeared. But in the meantime, her husband had to have her declared dead because she was gone for so long. He was going to a grief support group, and he meets this woman, and this woman falls in love with him because of how much he loved his first wife. And while she knows she will never replace her, she thinks like he's still like a good match for her. So when the woman returns, when Kate returns, she's in the house with her now ex-husband, his new wife, and their daughter, and I think another kid too. So it's like a weird family dynamic, and you don't know which way it's going to go, but you are figuring out what happened to Kate in all the years that she was gone. The next book was Appetite for Innocence. I think this book I liked the least. So it's basically two girls held in captivity. You have their POVs. The first one, I think her name was Sarah, and she has been there the longest. And she kind of is like the helper of the person that is holding them captive. It's a big fancy mansion, and they are kept in a basement. The other POV is this girl who, as soon as she gets in, she's like, I'm going to get out or die trying. Like, I'm not just going to be here, right? So she's fighting for her way out. So you get the alternate POVs of them while they're held in captivity and a little bit afterwards, which like I think the ending was pretty like good. The next one is The Best of Friends. This one I also didn't really love, and it has that neighborhood dynamic that I told you I like. But I feel like because I said like Lucinda Berry doesn't develop her characters, it was kind of hard to keep straight all the multiple POVs of these moms. But basically they were moms that were best friends as children. They grow up and they get pregnant around the same time, and they all have boys. And these boys are best friends the way they were. So they're able to like raise them together, and it's all good, right? One night, so they're at a sleepover and something happens. A gun goes off. One of the boys is dead. The other one sustained a gunshot to the head and is in a coma. And the other one simply will not talk. They all have different family dynamics. So as you read, you start figuring it out. And you're trying to figure out what happened that night and what led up to it. Classic Lucinda Berry at this point. Next book is Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed. I remember seeing this cover everywhere. And I think, I don't know why, I had this actually, after I read the book, I saw a few reviews. People had this like notion because of the summary of the book that it's going to be very like politically charged and kind of dark. And it really isn't. So in this book, the way the summary is this black babysitter, I forget her name. She is the babysitter to a wealthy white family. One night, the dad says something kind of like, you can take it as racist as a news anchor on the air, and his house gets egged. So while the police come to take a report, they call the babysitter and they offer her a lot of money to take the kid to the grocery store that's nearby just so she doesn't see the police. Because she's just very like anxious driven. She's like a 4-year-old and she has a lot of anxiety. So they're like, we'd rather her not see that. So like if you can take her out. And the babysitter's like, you know what? I've been out drinking, partying. I don't look like a babysitter right now. And they're like, oh, you know what? Just forget it. We don't, go ahead and have fun. And she was like, no, I will do it. I just want you to not be surprised when you see me. She picks up the little girl, takes her to the grocery store. And at that point, like, they're dancing and just trying to kill time. And a bunch of like people think that she kidnapped this little girl. A crowd develops and it goes from there. So people thought this was going to be very politically charged. And it was kind of more lighthearted, a lot of microaggressions. The main character kind of just does not care about it. She lets it like roll off her back. She has a lot of funny insights, but as a character, she's kind of dull. She doesn't have a lot to say. And she internalizes a lot of things, but sometimes it'll come out and she'll say like how she's struggling with money, how she knows like she's never going to get ahead and like things like that. Just like she's 25, so it's like it's such a fun age, but she is so crushed with debt and not knowing what she's going to do in the future. So like I'm guessing that's where the title comes from. But like I enjoyed it. Like I said, it's microaggressions, but the story takes this twist in the end that is just pure fun. So I enjoyed this book. I think like what people were expecting, like that whole like political intrigue book, a book that is The Barbarian Nurseries by Hector Tovar, but it is like Mexican instead of black. But it has like that dark undertones of like what happens when the law gets involved in this kind of situation, right? The next book is Absolution by Alice McDermott. I hated this book. This book took me like 2.5 books to read, and the reason why I pushed myself to finish it is because I almost bought it at Barnes & Noble, and then I saw my library had it. So I was like, you know what, let me just see if I like it, I'll buy it. And the whole time I was reading it, I didn't like it. And I was like, I cannot believe I almost paid $30 for this book. So the premise is interesting. She is a wife. The main character is a wife married to someone not in the military, but kind of hired by the military in Vietnam. So a lot of it takes place in Vietnam in the 60s, 70s during the war. And that's just not a time period that's usually covered in historical fiction. So that's why I thought it'd be like interesting. But the whole book, like, the character had nothing to say, both characters, because you have two POVs. The first POV is Patricia, the newlywed, and while she's in Vietnam, she meets this woman, Charlene, who's also married to someone like in the same kind of situation. And she's like profiting there. She's always like, she calls her a dynamo because she's always trying to do something. But she's popping pills, and Charlene's a mess. Charlene has a daughter named Rainey. And so in this book, Trisha is writing to Rainey for the first half, or like more than the first half. And the second half, it's Rainey's like POV. So like I said, while you're in Trisha's POV, she has nothing to say. She kind of looks down at Charlene and other people for having these Vietnamese maids that they pay nothing, basically, who treat them like babies. They turn down their beds for naps. They light candles for them. They don't lift a finger while they're in Vietnam. So while Trisha's looking down at them, she's also having the same things done for her, but it's like she thinks she has a different perspective on it, right? Her POV flashes back to like the civil rights movement and during Vietnam, so you get like a lot of like political thoughts, but she has like nothing to say about them. She's just there. So that irritated me about her POV. And then when you get to Rainey's POV, the thing that connects Rainey to Trisha, besides like her being a daughter, is Rainey, a decade or two later, she is the neighbor to this man named Dom, and Dom knew them in Vietnam. So that's kind of like what linked them and why Rainey started writing to her mom's old friends to see if they had any information on her mom or like just memories and stuff. But Dom has this son with Down syndrome. His name is Jamie. And Jamie's just like a delightful young man with Down syndrome. He's polite, he's sweet, he's thoughtful. He helps his dad and his dad loves him. But the whole time Rainey's looking at them like, that's so weird that he loves his son with Down syndrome so much. And her husband says something along the lines like, at least we never had to deal with something like that, referring to Jamie. And like nothing happens with that. She doesn't learn anything. She doesn't, like, nothing happens. It's just like judgmental attitudes towards a person with Down syndrome, which I know was the norm back then. But I just didn't get the point of it. And it just like really irritated me to see how befuddled she was that a father can love their disabled kid. I was looking at Goodreads and it actually had a high rating. So I had to filter to the lowest ratings, and a lot of the bad comments, a lot of the low ratings were what I just said. But this one comment says, I wish the little worst for every MF in. And that's how I feel about this book. The next book was like, it was just fun. It was a light read. It was The Diary of Donnie Ray by Andrea Davis Pink. It's one of those like Dear America books. And in this book, she's basically one of the first Black children that gets integrated into a school post-segregation. She kind of like, it has a lot of similarities to, what's her name? Ruby Davis. Like a lot like the baseball, and like there's a lot of overlap there, but it's just like a really sad book. The thing that also made me sad was her brother has autism, and seeing him try to understand why people were being mean to him for like no reason and calling him names, like, just made me really sad. But I mean, it's a Dear America book. Like, I kept all my Dear America books and I try to have Anna read them. And she's like, Mom, these are all very sad. And she was like 6 years old and she just never got into them. But yeah, you know, it was a book I read. The last book I read was Notes on an Execution. I don't know why I thought this book was going to be about an innocent man on death row. I don't know what gave me that impression, but that's what I went into it thinking. But basically, this book about a serial killer, and he has like a little, like, it's kind of weird because he does kill people when he's younger, and then he goes a long time without killing anybody, and then he kills somebody. And you have a POV of him and this girl that knew him in a foster home when he was younger, and who becomes a police detective that ends up capturing him and like putting the case together against him. It was interesting because like you see him as a baby, so you're kind of just like, is it nature or is it nurture? Because he exhibited some disturbing behavior when he was little that continued as he got older. But one thing that I really enjoyed about this book was like all the POVs were like that this man, I forgot what his name is, was intelligent. He was a smart guy, but he thought he was smarter than what he was. He thought he was more intelligent than what he was. But at the end of the day, he was just like an average guy that took the lives of women for no reason other than they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it gave him some kind of power trip, right? It did keep me engrossed because it was going into the past and into the current. So it tied together the book nicely, and I did enjoy this book. Anyways, those were all the books that I read in January, and I'll see you in the next one.